I'm Larry Ray, President and CEO of American Manganese Inc., listed on the TSX Venture, ticker symbol AMY, A-M-Y, with proprietary patents in the U.S., China, and South Africa. Our focus is on recycling lithium-ion batteries for electric vehicles. China recently legislated the responsibility for recycling onto their electric vehicle manufacturers and importers. For more information, please visit AmericanManganeseInc.com or phone me, Larry Ray, at 778-574-4444.
You're listening to HowStreet.com radio, available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. Welcome to HowStreet.com radio, the online source for market opinions. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is Danielle Park, editor of the popular blog Juggling Dynamite and president of Venable Park Investment Counsel Incorporated. Welcome back to the show, Danielle.
Hello, Jim.
Well, one show that you were watching was watching Elizabeth Warren grill the CEO of Wells Fargo about the scandal that they're involved in. They were fined $185 million for creating false accounts or churning those accounts so people were charged fees that they really didn't owe. $185 million sounds like a lot, but that only amounted to 3 days' profit at Wells Fargo.
Yes, and I think more specifically, it really uncovers what is rotten at the core of the financial sector in the world today. So what I loved about that segment that Warren was able to do with John Stumpf in the hearing was she was able to connect the dots in a way that I think the average person can comprehend and follow. And I think that that's something that is mostly missed in today's culture. So she was able to show that not only was there this systemic fraud going on that was driven by insane demands from the top down. So this whole cross-selling culture, where which is, by the way, the entire reason that banks wanted to consolidate with all the other investment firms and broker-dealers and insurance and all this stuff in the 90s. When Glass-Steagall was taken out, they began this, frenzy of hoovering up every kind of financial service that was available on the market. And the reason they did that was exactly for this cross-selling purpose. Okay, this is exactly what they did in the 20s that blew up everything and caused the Great Depression, and why we broke them up in the 30s so that they wouldn't be able to do this cross-selling. Because people are so vulnerable when they go to their bank and they put any cash in. And as I'm writing in our client letter this week, anyone who's ever had cash in a bank in the last few years has already experienced cross-selling full on, right? So it's where no matter what small sum of money you may have sitting in an account, someone wants to refer you to their, quote, financial advisor. Now, whether that be in branch or whether that be their broker-dealer side or their insurance side, they are all supposed to be ticking these boxes and getting these accounts referred or getting new credit applications opened. Or if you have money and you say you want to pay off a debt, they're supposed to say, why pay off the debt? Why not think about putting the cash instead into, these here investments over here? So this is why it's a broken model. And what she did perfectly was she was able to connect that dot between, first of all, because the CEO tried to say that this was a 5,300 bad employees, that this was not a culture of fraud or unreasonable sales targets that forced people to do these crazy things. And by the way, we know now that there was whistleblowers who were coming forward trying to tell management about the corrupt practices that were prevalent. This went on for many years, right? This is not like a couple of months. This is at least 3 years and probably longer than that they have documented evidence of all this happening. And so when the whistleblowers were coming forward, when employees when honest employees were saying, it's impossible to make every customer in the bank take 8 products. Like the average industry norm is 3, and management said, let's make it great. Let's have 8 because it rhymes with great. And they just decided they were going to drive this whole sales model from that top down. And, ethics be damned and collateral damage be damned. They were going to do this. So they kept upping the ante on the employees and forcing, more and more aberrant behavior, because many of the people that work in banks, are broke themselves, have availed themselves of all those, employee discounts to get loans and cars and all sorts of things that they really can barely manage to pay. So they're sort of over a barrel financially to begin with, and then they're at fear of losing their job and their benefits that often come with working at a bank. So anyway, when we look back, in 2013, a story was broke by the LA Times to bring this to everyone's attention, that there had been this mass systemic fraud, 2 million accounts opened that were fraudulent, And it wasn't just benignly opening accounts and then shutting them down. Many of these were credit applications that ended up hurting people's credit scores, meaning that thereafter they had to pay higher rates of interest on loans they took out because of no fault of their own, just because these things had been opened in their name. And then there was all the people who got fired for not hitting the targets because they refused to break the law and be, criminals to do it. And then there was the whistleblowers who were fired because they tried to bring this to attention. So management was, as Elizabeth Warren said, you either knew or you ought to have known. And then she made the point about why management had this incentive to not know. And the reason is that on every single quarterly call that the head CEO and CFO and people were doing with the Wall Street analysts, every 3 months they do these quarterly calls, and they were telling people in their annual reports about this great marketing genius that they had of great, right? And how they reported, we've got it up to 5.7, we got it up to 6, we got it up to 6.3. So they were proclaiming this as evidence of their miraculous operation and genius, and all the while talking up their stock. And as she says to him, do you know how much you personally profited from talking up this stock based on this cross-selling, moniker that you were using as this genius? And the answer is $200 million. So his personal shares, not all the other in the C-suite, just him personally, his shares went up $200 million while he was talking up this cross-selling magic. And now we learn that most of that was fraudulent, or much of that was fraudulent. And all of that, even if it's not fraudulent, even if we're not talking about the fake accounts that were opened, it really uncovers this toxic culture that force feeds financial products onto people through high-pressure tactics. And clearly, they are not in the customer's best interest. It is not in your best interest to hold 8 different types of accounts and credit apps from any institution. And so it really just shows what a perverse system and incentives that we have. And I think what I loved about it is that I am so well read on the Pecora Commission and what went on in 1933 when Ferdinand Pecora was called in at the last minute to do a Senate Banking Committee hearing exactly like this one that had been requisitioned to find out, who was at fault in the crash of 29. And by 33, they had still not come after the head CEOs. Many people had lost their life savings and jobs. Many institutions had gone bankrupt. The bank investors who had been force sold all these products lost their life savings. But the CEOs and the Charles Mitchells and company of the world were still these kind of rock stars that people perceived they were so wealthy they must be somehow above it all. He brought them in and systematically questioned them, much like Warren was able to do, and connected those dots between the sales practices they were forcing on their staff and the bonuses and financial compensation that they were taking off the top. And it wasn't until the public had that revelation, because they didn't have the internet or they didn't have live hearings in those days, but the press went out to the was sitting in the courtroom and then would go out and write stories for the local papers and send the news around the country of what these big men were admitting to, everything from avoiding tax through sketchy moves to, cashing out, to forcing the little guys to do all these unethical things at threat of losing their job. He admitted all that stuff on the stand, and when the news got out, within a week he'd lost his job. And so we'll see what flows from this, but we are living in a time when the apathy for this behavior was really, really deep for a long time, and people were rather oblivious. And now we're in a time when people are losing favor with the whole central bank magic. You're having more and more people come out week after week to declare the madness of the situation. And then when you get this kind of a revelation in such a public way, now available on YouTube where everyone can watch this connecting of these dots, as I say, I think we're at a turning point. And at least I'm encouraged that one of these days will be the turning point, even though it's gone on incredibly long and been tolerated so widely. I think that the revulsion is building in the public, and that's how we'll finally get our way back to a breakup scenario of these really toxic institutions.
Would the president of Wells Fargo pay back the $200 million?
So that was one of the things that Warren was putting to him as well, that although, all this fraud had been revealed, and although they had made this incredible compensation, and by the way, the $200 million is not counting the, tens of millions that he made every year based on bonuses because they hit these targets, not counting the compensation that was achieved by his other C-suite and board members, also his one of his head honchos, the lady who retired from the bank with $125 million in compensation, and that was after all this had been revealed as happening under her watch. So they really just fired the low-level folks who could least afford to lose their job. They fired the supervisors, direct supervisors, branch managers. So they all paid a financial penalty, so to speak, but the higher-ups, plead oblivious, and they didn't know anything about it, according to them. And so they didn't offer. They didn't offer their jobs. They didn't offer to resign. They didn't offer any compensation clawbacks whatsoever. And so to date, that hasn't happened. Now, hopefully, as I say, it takes public ire to compound over time to demand change. It takes getting to a point where politicians who have been coerced and captured by finance because it's become so wealthy, it takes this breaking point where politicians are so afraid that they're about to lose all their power because they've sided with these corrupt people, that they then finally do the right thing and say, okay, I got to distance myself from you guys. You're so unpopular right now that I have to distance myself. And then, because the Return to Glass-Steagall Act has already been proposed, if you'll recall, Jim. It's already been before, but it hasn't had sufficient quorum to pass. So it's these tipping points and these compounding revelations that finally historically have brought about the kind of change, systemic breakup change, antitrust, abusive trust, racketeering. We have all these laws already in place. It's a question of political will to enforce them. And I think that's coming.
We'll have more with Danielle Park right after the break.
Gem International is a new diamond explorer in the richest diamond producing country in Africa, located next to the fourth largest producing diamond mine in the world. International Spotlight is on an 1109 carat diamond recently discovered in Africa by a fellow Canadian junior with a proven operator and finance team. Gem International trades on the TSX Venture Exchange, symbol GI. Visit us at gemdiamondmining.com.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Danielle Park. Danielle, one thing you'd like to see, and perhaps every American, is what does Donald Trump's tax return look like? Should that be the law?
I'm shocked that it isn't the law. I actually assumed it was the law, but apparently it's not. So there's been a proposal now for the Presidential Tax Transparency Act that would require every presidential candidate to release their taxes. I think, again, what is very good about established jurisprudence and law, history, the common law, is that we're concerned about apprehension of bias or how things look, right? And so in judicial matters, they will go far out of their way to make it look as though there's no chance that anything is being hidden or done untoward. That's exactly what you need in public office. You need people to go the extra mile of transparency. So whether or not you're hiding anything, the fact that you were not forthcoming with your tax returns suggests to me that there's, something rotten in the state there. So I think he should definitely disclose it. And if people are prepared to vote for someone who is not prepared to disclose their tax information, I think they are truly, there's not much help you can offer them. I put another link on about how this whole contest, this whole political contest, is really focusing on the propensity seemingly of both candidates for deception. It's really a contest of liars at this point. And a new study was done by PolitiFact, who did an actual fact-check study on things that Trump and Clinton have been saying in their speeches to date. And they confirmed that, in fact, very little of what they say is actually accurate in terms of factual, but Trump's actually less true than Clinton, and yet people are perceiving her as the more dishonest person. So they were trying to understand why this would be the case. again, this is a race to the bottom. When we're talking about who's the least dishonest, you're in a world of trouble. That these two candidates represent supposedly the greatest democracy in the world is a shocking statement in itself. But what this theory was, and I think it has some weight, is that Trump has always been considered a salesman. And there's always kind of this sales puff room around sales pitches, right? So people will say, well, he's a salesman, he's a grandstander, he's a showboat. And so you give them sort of more leeway and under that standard than you would a doctor, for example, who is supposed to tell you the truth about your diagnosis and not give you a bunch of sales puff. So when it comes to politicians, apparently there's, a higher standard of expectation that they can't just lie their way through everything, or they can't just fill you with sales puff. They're supposed to give you some facts. So they were just saying they think that because Trump is held to a lower standard of honesty, being this salesman standard, whereas Clinton's held to this political standard, that generally speaking, she's more harshly judged for her deceit and inaccuracies. So anyway, it's an interesting theory, but I think it, as I say, just points to the pathetic nature of this contest in general and how lacking in character people really are.
Well, the Trump Foundation is now under investigation for doing such things as paying his legal bills.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I saw that. Nothing he says truly rings true to me, and that doesn't mean that I like Hillary Clinton as a candidate, but I am shocked and amazed at how many people are somehow seduced by his nonsense. I think he is absolutely vapid, and it's kind of an affront. It's kind of an affront to thinking people everywhere that he could end up being the leader of, what's supposed to be one of the more progressive nations on earth.
Well, one of his recent news conferences was called not to publicize anything major, that he was going to admit that President Obama was born in the United States, but most of it was taken up to promote his new hotel and casino.
Well, so here's something that I think is missed in this diagnosis of what's going on today, because it is a pattern of behavior, this maniacal sort of God complex that humans tend to develop when they have disproportionate rewards that far outweigh their talents and abilities and merit. And we've seen it in other periods in history, whether it is through a monarchy system where people inherit great riches without any actual personal, as I say, merit for achieving the fruit of their birth, so to speak. But I think what happens is that we all have this propensity to lose ourselves, to lose our sense of, purpose and self-worth. And the more we are overcompensated, the more we are lauded and revered, the more media exposure perhaps that we have, in general, people are susceptible to this, falling into this God complex. And what it tends to evolve into is a sort of a mental illness almost, where you believe that you can say anything you want and get away with it because perhaps you've been held, as I said, to this lower standard of credibility, and also because you've been able to buy your way or bully your way back through things. If anyone accuses you of anything, you sue them. You have lawyers and the wherewithal to kind of bury them, shut them down, whether or not they're speaking truth to power or not. And I think that as that goes on, it develops into almost like a legitimate mental illness where you believe the things you say. You believe that you, by saying things, can, create reality just from your saying it, as opposed to reality being something objective from yourself. So I think that we've seen it in other times in history, and it's part and parcel of this great elite division that takes place at different times. And this particular time, it has greatly concentrated on anyone who has had to do with financial assets. So Trump being having ridden the credit bubble up through his aspirational wealth properties all over the world, through people being able to golf and travel and do all these things they were doing on credit, by the demographic surge of baby boomers looking to, enjoy their later years, by the Federal Reserve pumping in free money, by tripling the money supply, by allowing all these asset bubbles to go to unprecedented levels in human history. Anyone who's sort of at the front end taking commissions off that, or who is riding that wave up, has really got this incredible enrichment through the process, and they have left behind anyone sort of doing more, regular activities, indeed ones that produce greater benefit to society in many cases, are making a fraction of what these people are. Then you have this concentration of power and control in the message through the media, which, again, Donald Trump's been commanded much media attention. So it's all back to this idea of the Wizard of Oz. In the Wizard of Oz, when he can project his voice and his image, when he can hide behind a curtain and look like a huge person, he has a God complex, and people believe whatever he says. I'm reminded of this whenever I see all this circus around the central bankers today. We hardly go through a day, Jim, where we aren't held hostage to some big speech or conference coming from one of these people. And, what was the big hoopla yesterday? The Bank of Japan and the Central Bank of the United States, they both did nothing. Wow, they both did nothing. Extremely euphoric response in markets and everyone running around. What's the good news? What's the good news? Oh, they're out of bullets. They did nothing. Oh, wow, great celebration. Like madness, right? Madness. Because people have stopped noticing or following things that matter and been distracted by these showmen and show people off into following the things that are completely destructive in the long run. So I think all these things go together, and I see it as consistent, whether it be the central bank worship of media figures and politicians because they're on our news feed constantly, and I think it would be so much better served if humanity could start focusing on things that matter instead of all this nonsense that in the end just wastes our resources. It directs smart minds who would be capable of many things into following, nonsense and making a whole career out of nonsense following. And it's just unfortunate because there's so many things that we actually need to focus on and that many smart people are really working hard on and could use help to direct energies and attention in the right direction. And instead we're distracted constantly by sideshows.
Well, it seems countries are now designed to protect the billionaires and screw the little person.
Well, this has been the thwarting of democracy that's happened the world over, as I say, because these people have been such a gulf of enrichment between the ones who have ridden the asset bubbles up, which have been aided and abetted by government policies and central bank policies, who are not actually the government. They're the linkage between the public purse and the banking system, which has, been part of our problem there in of itself. So yeah, that has sort of concocted this mess that we are all in today. So it's, I think it'll come to an end because it is not a sustainable system, and we tend to have a collapse of these oppressive regimes that are pushing down on democratic impulses the world over, trying to control messages. Whether it's Twitter or Facebook editing what information a person is allowed to say through their feeds, or whether it is far right wing instruments trying to control what information is disseminated to the public. I think democracy requires a bunch of things, but it requires free access to information so that people can make decisions. But it also requires a thinking populace. And I think that's where the individuals tend to fall down in many cases. Instead of thinking and, reflecting and trying to find things that are healthy and sustaining, they are seduced to the dark side by the showmen and show people of the world that promise them, easy fixes that don't require behavioral changes. And that's just not how we're going to correct this.
One of my frequent guests suggested to me the U.S. government wants an education system that keeps people smart enough to run their war machines, but not smart enough to question what the government is doing.
Well, that could be. That could be the darker side of human nature. Throughout time, there's been pockets of that, there's no doubt. I think a lot of this is just more benign. I think there's a seductive aspect of money. And as I say, with the asset bubbles that have happened in the proliferation of banking and cross-selling, where everybody's been convinced that having debt and loans is wealth, you've had this appetite to take on, I ran into a man at the gym the other day who seemed like a very nice man. I've seen him there before. You know, one of those guys you just nod at, but you don't actually know who the person is. And for whatever reason, he started telling us that he has been following Scott McGillivray, you know, on the Home and Garden television. Now, Scott McGillivray may be a nice fella, but he works for the CIBC Bank. And his whole thing started from teaching people to renovate to now teaching people how to take out loans from the Bank of CIBC and lever themselves up into the housing market at the highest prices in Canadian history. So this poor man who has a salary-based job working somewhere has been following this advice and has evidently gutted the equity in his home and bought 8 investment properties in the Canadian market at all-time highs with max leverage and very, minimum down. So this is an example where people may think that it sounds so, intelligent or sophisticated, and they're told this is what sophisticated people do. This is Donald Trump's college, right? How to teach people to be property magnates, and he sold these $1,000, multi-$1,000 programs to people because they wanted the trick. What's the secret to become a big land mogul? And in the end, it's leverage yourself up to incredible risk that very few can even afford to take. And as prices go up, they're reinforced in thinking they're being brilliant, and then when prices collapse, they lose everything. And the false prophets who showed them that way skimmed their profits all up front, whether it be commissions or fees for doing the transactions or taking the courses on how to do all this. And they walk away with no responsibility whatsoever because in the end, they were a salesperson. Right? They were held to the sales puff standard, but you thought they were your friend giving you the inside tip. So this is where, the system is set up to make suckers out of people. And when they are being told by someone who is either in the media and seems really, quote, nice and smart, or whether it's someone in your banking system when you go into your local branch and they seem so nice and helpful, who tell you you're a valuable customer, who stroke your ego and make you think, oh, awesome, this is how I'm going to get rich, and this person's helping me. That is the pitfalls that people are very vulnerable to. And so, I think, as I say, no one in particular is trying to create financial destruction, or very few of them are, but they're reckless in their activities. They don't think enough, and they don't care enough about the actual life impact on the human they're speaking with. They're more about their own compensation and sales targets. And therein lies a recipe for disaster.
Danielle, thank you so much for chatting with us.
Okay, thank you, Jim.
My guest has been Danielle Park, editor of the popular blog Juggling Dynamite. You're listening to HowStreet.com radio. You can find us on Twitter at TalkDigitalNet. Our YouTube channel is Talk Digital Network. You can forward questions to info@HowStreet.com. I'm Jim Goddard. Thanks for listening.
Comments made on HowStreet.com radio are an expression of opinion only and should not be construed in any matter whatsoever as recommendations to buy or sell any financial instrument at any time. Available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. HowStreet.com radio is a production of HowStreet Media Incorporated.